This
All right,
podcast is
we're
live.
live. Welcome, everyone, and thanks for showing up. Pop into the chat and talk to us. And if you're watching a replay, thank you. So, this week, we're going to talk about why governments want to increase the traceability of money and why maybe it will have some unintended consequences for crypto. And we'll talk about some recent events that have happened around money laundering that show why governments really care about traceability. I'm super excited because today we have this amazing and dynamic guest. She's a crypto favorite in Canada. We have our guest, which is Amber Scott, who's also an AML ninja. We have Dave and myself from MetaMesh. Hey, Amber, what's an AML ninja?
That's what happens when nerds shrug free of the corporate shackles and get to make up our own business title. I really didn't like titles when I launched Outlier. I thought they were silly, so I just kind of went with something that had been my nickname for a long time. But my business cards actually say CEO now on them too, because I know my lawyer said that I should do that and have like the official title. So the last time we redid our paperwork, they were like, it's time to put on your big girl pants. So.
I don't even have big girl pants.
Yeah, ninja is still there too. It's just there's a comma,
Awesome.
I have a question.
Yeah,
for those of us ninjas of other disciplines, what's AML? What does it stand for?
Oh, anti-money laundering.
Oh, great. So don't take money from Amber. She'll find out you're doing it.
So, hey, Amber, if I wanted to launder money, what are the steps?
Yeah.
We're doing like the placement layering integration thing. Is that what this was? Okay.
Maybe.
Yeah.
It's totally theoretical, of course.
This isn't live.
So this is like, there are commonly known like steps to money laundering where in the theory you'll talk about, first of all, there has to be a crime and the crime has to generate some kind of proceeds. So, like, let's say that I want to sell black market organs on the dark web. And then you're going to pay me with Bitcoin.
Love it.
Right. So those are crime.
Somehow.
And then at some point you're going to place that money into the financial system, and that's placement. So when I'm like, I can't actually pay my mortgage, and my mortgage, company isn't accepting Bitcoin, so now I need dollars. So I'm going to go to an exchange. That's the point at which it gets placed in the financial system. You might have some layering, so I might move it around into different virtual currencies. So crossing different chains, making it harder to trace. Making it harder, if you're going from exchange to exchange, from country to country, from chain to chain, right? Just making it harder to follow the money. And then at the point where that's known as integration, it just looks like normal money, right? It's hard to figure out that this is actually criminally derived money. Okay. That's it. That's money laundering in a nutshell.
You got in ahead of me and told me how to launder money in crypto. I was just thinking like traditionally, but
so crypto is a horrible way to launder money for what it's worth.
Yeah.
Even though the crypto space is growing, there's still relatively small market caps. And when you're talking about things like big cartels and criminal organizations, they want to launder millions upon millions of dollars.
We're talking Ozarks.
Yeah, Ozarks is amazing. I love that show.
I know, it's such a good show.
Right? It's
I'm learning how to launder through it.
They make a lot of mistakes in that one too, which is interesting to see, right? Because you see where law enforcement knows what they're doing and not. You see where the banks start to get suspicious, the things that they do. So they use a lot of offshore banks in Ozarks and offshore companies. That's one of the things that eventually you have to get the money back to, another place. So it's not like they are living in the same countries where they have offshore banks. So eventually they want to get it back to the places where they're buying houses and cars and things like that. And that's always a trigger point in terms of being able to figure out that these things are happening.
Okay.
But going back to crypto, one of the things that happens, like, let's say I want to move $1 million, and Chainalysis did a really neat piece. I think it was Chainalysis. It might've been Cyphertrace. Anyways, one of them did a really neat article about, what happens when you try to put $1 million through a mixer or a tumbler.
Oh, okay.
So you have these services where, people are trying to anonymize their transactions, and there's a lot of legitimate reasons that someone may want to do that. But if you try to move a large amount of value through one of these services, they just don't have that type of volume. So you end up with these patterns where you see, oh, big transaction happened here, lots of little transactions, congregation here. And it doesn't matter if it's 4 or 5 hops away, it's still pretty visible that that's the thing that's happened. So crypto really isn't at a point where it's easy to make these transactions invisible. It's not really at a point where there, for those large criminal organizations, that there is that liquidity or that there is that desirability. The price, for the most part, goes all over the place. And so you have that piece.
What is it? Sorry to interrupt you, Amber. I was just thinking, like, I get so frustrated because, like, still we hear all over the news, like, crypto money laundering, and it's like so bad, and that's why governments are really concerned, and mainstream media loves to throw that at it. But I remember, like, there was that study about a year ago that MIT did, and they analyzed 200,000 Bitcoin transactions, and they found that only 2% were labeled illicit. And I'd love to hear, do you have stats on, like,
yeah, do you know what we're never going to talk? Here's the thing that we're never going to talk about. We're never going to talk about the percentage of money that moves through any particular bank, especially any particular North American bank that's going to be illicit, because that study is being done by no one ever. We're also not going to talk about the fact that the US dollar is the official currency of crime. Even in the fiat world, when we talk about money laundering, and the common lexicon, the common language talks about something called the black market peso exchange.
Okay.
If it were completely candidly named, it would be called the black market US dollar exchange, because there's no one that's going around saying, hey, like, queremos pesos mexicanos. Like, no, everybody that's doing business in international crime is doing it in US dollars. And this isn't because US dollars are particularly bad or evil or malevolent. This is because it's seen as the most stable reserve currency. It's seen as the most accepted and widespread currency. So in that same way, whenever something is considered to have a good pedigree, it's sexy to criminals in the same way that it's sexy to just your regular run-of-the-mill business people that are doing international trade. So from that respect, there are reasons that virtual currencies are attractive to certain types of criminals and certain types of crimes. Certainly not as easy to launder as dollars. Certainly not as desirable to use exchanges as it is to use banks. But we don't demonize those things because we all use them, right? And I think there is
and my grandma uses them.
and my grandma uses them. And we have a vested interest in protecting the reputation of those systems.
So I'm just thinking about, there's this, like, we hear that there's a shortage of US dollars, right? Something like 70% of global trade is settled in US dollars. There's the euro shadow dollar. And even criminals clearly love the dollar.
Meg, what's a shadow dollar and how can I get some? I never heard that, actually.
It's a coin that Megs will be having an ICO for immediately after this podcast.
I thought
get in early.
ICOs were passe. I need to do something in DeFi.
Oh yeah, there's probably a new term.
Something like yams.
No, but not quite like that.
What is a euro shadow dollar? Honestly, I don't know. What is that?
So
sometimes I fake not knowing, but
do you want to cover this, Amber, or do you want me?
Yeah, what is it?
No, go.
Okay, no, I'll try. Okay, so I've been doing a lot of learning about the macro world, and my understanding of the shadow dollar is so there's a big demand for dollars, like I said, because so much trade happens in the USD, but the dollar that's in the US kind of stays in the US and it's used there, and you can't just like easily send dollars to Europe. It has to go through the banking system. So there's kind of like a limited supply that gets sent to Europe, but everybody wants to keep trading in these dollars. So there's, I don't know if it's like it's not a different exchange rate, but they're kind of kept as separate markets. And there's been some really great podcasts by Nathaniel Whitmore on the breakdown about this, if you want to go more into it. But overall, what it is, the crazy thing is people don't know how many dollars that have been moved kind of within the European market. I think that's partly why it's called shadow dollar. But yeah, definitely, dive more into that through some people that have really studied it, and we'll include the links below. But it's just an indicator of like there's just so much demand for dollars both in traditional markets, but also like, I guess, amongst money launderers.
That's so interesting.
That's it. And I think there's a part of that too that speaks to when we move from something that's physical and tangible to something that's digitized. We have a lot of representations of money that doesn't exist. And we have that in various forms of things that have value. So one of the really interesting things that's come up lately is that if you hold silver at one of your banks, and you go into the bank and they've been charging you this storage fee all this time, they will give you the monetary value of the silver that they are purportedly holding for you. But it is very difficult, if not impossible, to get physical silver. So this is a really interesting thing, because when you enter into that contract, the idea is that this is an organization that's holding the physical asset for you. You know, does that asset actually exist or not? Do those dollars actually exist or not? Or is this an entry on a ledger? And if someone actually went to cash out into physical dollars, would they be able to do that thing?
Amber, it's so funny. I know you're talking about legitimate banks, but sometimes it's hard to tell the difference between money laundering and regular finance. It just sounds so shady.
Oh, yeah. But
right?
I mean, when they do it, it's legal.
Yeah. Oh. Sounds
it's
shady.
not really.
I mean, yeah. I can't imagine an American bank or company ever selling something they don't have, or collapsing global financial systems or anything.
You're making me
so ethical.
Yeah, Dave, you're making me think about this desire for like the physical asset, where I heard there was, you know, when the economic turmoil first hit earlier this year, people really wanted physical gold. And I'm sure it was the same for physical dollars, where there was a premium if you actually wanted the gold versus like gold certificates, because people are like, well, do they really have it?
And that's a real question. That's a legitimate question. There's really interesting trade-offs that we make in terms of how we custody things that are of value. And I think that that's something that holds very much true in the crypto world. I think it's fascinating in terms of, you know, custodial exchanges, non-custodial exchanges, wallet services, what that looks like. There are so many questions and challenges around that. I think not the least of which is the real sovereignty that can exist with a virtual currency that doesn't exist in the same way in the fiat world. And what I mean by that is that if money is in my bank account and someone defrauds me, I call my bank and I file a police report and I show that I've been defrauded, and they refund that money into my account. One hopes, unless something goes wrong. But that's some headaches aside, usually the path that it takes. But if something happens and I mean to send Bitcoin from one wallet to another and I fail for whatever reason, so I mistype an address or I do something like that.
Bitcoin's forever.
Then it's gone, right? There is no customer service that you can call. You might be able to publicize and say like, hey, I sent money to this address, and if you have it, can you please contact me and send it back?
Talk to Bitcoin's manager.
Yeah, you cannot Karen Bitcoin. It is unkarenable.
But I think though, the fact that you can see at least where it went, there's that auditability. But you also, know how much it is. So if there's like a reserve, for example, talking back to those gold or silver bars, it's like, exactly how much that bank or that organization or your own wallet is custodying for you.
Exactly.
Yeah. Amber, it reminds me of what happens when the bank is defrauding you and forecloses and sells your house without telling you, and you can't get it back. So there are some definite benefits to the way banking works now, but you're really at the mercy of these people who will literally sell your house, and not on accident.
At least the accident is yours when you mistype, I think.
Yeah.
Up your life.
And you at least know who to blame, But
speaking of maybe accidents or non-accidents, Yes, in the crypto world, we had crypto ledger company get breached, and we did a video maybe about 2 weeks ago talking about that. It was saucy. But now we have the Canadian government getting breached, and I know this maybe is a bit of a hot button issue, or that you like to talk about.
It gets me fired up.
Yeah, I know. I want to get Amber fired up. What's going on, Amber?
So we had a CRA breach that we as Canadians, so a bunch of Canadians had like CERB applied for in their names and sent to accounts that they did not open.
Amber, wait. Hold on. Acronyms. CRA is Canadian Revenue Agency.
Canada Revenue Agency. And CERB is the relief fund that's available for Canadians. So you have to apply for it. It has taxable consequences, so it gets added to your income that gets taxed at your marginal tax rate, which is a bigger deal for some people than others. But in essence, it was there was a breach that happened. People's accounts were accessed, so they would go to the government site. Apply for this thing. There very little was done in terms of the background, and I think that's okay, because in a pandemic they were trying to respond as quickly as they could to get money to Canadians. Fine, maybe you don't need to upload a ton of documentation, but you had criminal groups that were en masse opening bank accounts at financial institutions where it was particularly easy to fraudulently open a bank account online. They were applying for the money. So the government funding, they were having it sent to these bank accounts and then they were pulling it out.
Yeah.
So for an individual, they basically suffered this identity fraud with an attached possible taxable consequence. And we found out about it because enough people complained to CBC, which is a national news agency, that CBC did a number of Freedom of Information Act requests and finally just poked and prodded. And thank you, CBC, we love you. And finally poked and prodded the government agency into saying, oh yeah, there was a data breach and people's data was breached, and finally shutting down. So last weekend, online access to Canada Revenue Agency for individuals was shut down. Let me emphasize that this has been going on for months.
Yeah.
They presumably these same people who have talked to CBC and got them investigating had also talked to CRA. So presumably they would have known about the data breach for months.
Yeah.
Had they notified Canadians? Were they held to the same standard? Like me as a private business, if there has been a significant data breach, I have a very small window, like where people can be harmed. And I feel like the accessing of people's personal, financial, and tax data is a significant risk of harm. I don't think that's a debate.
Yeah.
But as a private business, you have a really small window to contact people, to start your ongoing investigation, but to let people know, hey, there's been a breach, there's a problem.
Yeah.
Here's the stuff you have to do to protect yourself. That hasn't happened in this situation. There are still people that are figuring out like, my data has been breached. So
and they to the government, it'll look like they owe taxes probably, right? It looks like they got paid out.
Yeah. So I think some of this, like yesterday or the day before, they made a statement that they think they really had their arms around the breach and they understand exactly what the scope and scale was, and here's what it is. I would love to be proven wrong on this, but I think what we're seeing is the tip of the iceberg, and that we're not really going to understand the scope and scale until next year when people start filing taxes and say,
and someone's like, hey,
I did not get this benefit. I did not apply for this benefit. What is this account that's connected to my CRA account?
Wow.
It really bugs me.
I think we're going to see it at that point. Like we're not going to see it until people log into their accounts.
Man.
And for people that have their accountant do everything on their behalf, and never look at their own CRA account, that might be even longer. So I'm.
Is this Amber? This sounds unusual. Is it normal for like major tax agencies to get hacked like this? Or is this a new precedent of
disgustingly common?
Really?
Tell us more.
Oh my gosh. The IRS keeps all our information on old like magnetic tapes, so you couldn't hack it if you tried.
Well, you know what?
Tell us more, Matt.
Yeah, tell us more, Amber, and then I'll tell you why I'm concerned.
So, I mean, any time that there's a data honeypot, which is just a bunch of data that has value, that has use, and use for nefarious purposes, it will get hacked. I don't think it's a matter of really looking at it and saying, oh, when will this happen? How will this happen? It's like, if this will happen, it's a when, you know. And these agencies are collecting massive amounts of data. There are legacy systems. There's not, and Megs, you've spent time in government, so please forgive me for my criticism here of government procurement processes.
No, by all means.
But
I've seen the inside.
I feel like sometimes the coders that are working on these things could probably make the people that are doing unaudited DeFi contracts look good.
So, you know why I'm concerned? Dave, could you pull up the?
Because that's all our data.
No, I know, but
so every Canadian that is not a child, your data has been breached at some point. If you are over 18, your financial data has been accessed.
So Amber, what are you saying? We all need an adult.
Yeah.
Yeah. Matt, what did you want me to bring up?
Me too.
Yeah. So it's because you mentioned honeypot, Amber, and right away I'm thinking the CRA has a new honeypot, a bigger honeypot in some ways, a crypto honeypot, because the Canada Revenue Agency earlier this year requested all user data from everyone that was ever involved in Quadriga. So about 100,000 users. So it's their addresses, their transactions, their wallet addresses, you know, names, etc. So the CRA now has everyone's data, and it's like a even bigger honeypot, because they know, like, they can connect crypto people to, names and crypto holders together. So it's just like, man, they really got to buckle down on this.
So I mean, this is kind of an interesting one to me in terms of partly Quadriga itself and some of the issues that they faced, and how much user data was, you know, real user data and accurate user data.
Yeah.
Like you have a co-founder who's a known fraudster and money launderer that you know, did things that involved identity theft previously in Michael Petrin, Omar Danani. So I do question the validity of some of that data going into it. But then the data that's specifically connected to the bankruptcy proceedings, where people had come forward, where they had responded, where they had provided information, I think that's a completely different scenario. And I think that gets interesting in terms of how can that data be used, what's permissible. I am not an expert on enabling tax legislation, but certainly if I got an inquiry around that, like I would definitely want to make sure that I was talking to a tax lawyer, or talking to my accountant who had been hired through my lawyer to make sure that we were having good privileged conversations in terms of the best strategy and the best defense in that regard.
Yeah. So the lawyers did, the lawyers representing all users did speak to CRA agents, and, you know, they verbally were told that they're not going to use it to, for example, launch audits into the users. But the point is that the CRA has been breached. There is a honeypot, and it's just another point where, you know, crypto users could get defrauded or hit from other angles as well.
So from an operational security perspective, I mean, I think there's some obvious steps that people can take. So I think if you have, like, number one, if you've been reusing wallet addresses, stop it. It's really easy.
But it's easy to reuse them. Why don't you?
But it's really easy not to. Like, it's really easy to spawn new addresses from your hardware wallet. So like, move things from that address and stop just reusing addresses, but go through and figure out if you have
approaching 1 Bitcoin. Amber, I want to see it.
That's fine. You can congregate it in one wallet, but I think that's part of it. And I think you make a really good point, is that you have all of this data related to Quadriga, and a lot of it is probably going to be leaked in a variety of different ways. Like through breaches, through a completely legitimate sharing of data, where like things end up in archive, things end up in court files, things don't end up protected the way that they should be. And suddenly those have some sort of utility to a criminal.
Yeah.
And so I think that from that perspective, for the users that were affected by that, there's definitely an exercise that you have to do for your own sanity in terms of saying, you know, which addresses were these that were associated to this? Are these addresses that I'm reusing? Is there still anything that's connected to it, like to my withdrawal address? You know, how do I move that? How do I disconnect things?
So what I'm hearing you say is that if you think you might in the future have a breach, or you're worried about your data, and I haven't been reusing addresses, or I'm making it really easy to track me, you're providing some tips on how to protect yourself in the future. Is that right?
That's exactly it. It's the same as you would have. I mean, in the fiat world, there's some steps that you would take immediately. So if I knew that my bank had a breach, my bank will usually offer me credit monitoring for free through the credit bureaus. You would set up a flag on your bureau. You would start, you know, you would monitor against fraudulent activity. If I've ever had it, so I've had an instance where I had a card stolen. And one of the things that I made my bank do immediately is I was like, so you've got to cancel that credit card.
Yeah.
And you've got to issue me a new card number. Like, I don't want a new plastic that has the same number on it. You need to issue me a new account number. And yes, I realize that this is going to mess up anything that I have an automated payment for, but I would rather have that than to continue dealing with this
that's a really
fraudster.
Because like on the one hand, there's like the balance of complexity and changing things out, and you could get overwhelmed by it if you weren't fluent in crypto. But what you said there is like, even if you kind of messed up and gave somebody your information that you shouldn't have trusted, a lot of people might not know that you don't just sit on your hands and do nothing, because you wouldn't do that, like you said, with a debit card, with a credit card.
No, you wouldn't just be like, oh, I hope the fraudster doesn't fraud me.
I think that's an amazing
Shouldn't
point.
have given that guy my password.
Yeah.
Oh no!
You do something.
I hope it happens with a smaller dollar amount tomorrow. That's a very good point. So okay. Yeah. Amber, how do then, like, as a regular user, how do I strike the balance? Is it about how much money, like, would I change an address less frequently if there was less money in that wallet? Or like, how do I balance, because I'm lazy and I'm gonna not do best practices with my own personal money? I would never risk a customer or a client's money, of course. But like, if I'm being lazy with my own stuff, like,
then find options that work for your level of technical skill. Because I think probably much more Bitcoin has been lost just through things like I dyslexically typed the wrong address, which is why I know it's a horrible practice.
I have a friend who
in some regards, but
Ethereum.
I will copy and paste things. I will send things to my printer. I will drill the crap out of the hard drive of the printer before I send it to a scrapyard. But also, like, I will print things on paper, because the odds of my writing it down incorrectly as a dyslexic person super high. And so I'm more at risk because I did a shit job writing something down than I am from someone breaking into a safe deposit box or a safe or something like that, right? So those are things that I think you need to think about realistically. You need to think about who you are. You need to think about what your skill set is, what the vulnerabilities are that apply to you, and what you're willing to do. And then find the tools that are going to work for you that's going to make that really easy. So I'm a huge fan of the Trezor wallet. Because it like that whole don't reuse addresses, it's doing that automatically.
Nice.
So every time I go in, it's just like, oh, generate new address. It's a click. Am I too lazy to click a button? I am not. That works for me.
There you go,
Click
Dave.
the button, Dave. Click the button.
Yeah. What is it? I have how many Satoshis that you sent me, Mags, during a live stream that I haven't gotten off my old phone yet?
Because I think I sent him 100. It's tiny. But it'll be tons in like.
I'll be buying.
He's going to build a citadel.
Someday it'll be enough to buy an island, and I won't be able to find it, and it's going to be my fault.
I feel like this is the story of a lot of like a lot of people in crypto, and that you have to have that like, oh snap, I lost this and can't get it back lesson.
Yeah, you
mine
better
was
have it early on.
7,000 Dogecoin, where I was just like, I thought I had done a backup and I hadn't, or I have no idea where I put it, and just like I use it in presentations where I'm like, here you go, here's the public address.
Yeah.
I can see it. I can see it sitting there since I moved it to that address.
Oh, that's heartbreaking, Amber. It's
such sad.
I think you make a good point. Like, I have accounts that I am very on top of, and I'm very aware of what's in there and what's in that. But like my Sats account that I set up for the Lightning Network live stream, I'm willing to risk 100 Sats. I don't care how much it's worth in 10, 20 years. I would like to back it up, and I'd like to remember to. But yeah, I make that risk with that account, but everything else,
he's just trying to make a lesson. But Amber, let's kind of circle this back. So we're talking about wallets, like peer-to-peer wallets. I have my own wallet. I'm going to send Dave some wallet, but I think there's maybe some new rules coming down the pipe that I want to chat about, or just in general. So I think about governments, right? And they're concerned about fraud and money laundering. And we've had these rules in place for a long time in the traditional world. And now we're getting new anti-money laundering rules made around digital currencies. And at the moment, my understanding is that peer-to-peer kind of transfers of crypto, of Bitcoin, aren't included. But I'm under the impression that they're kind of concerned about this being an issue down the road. I'd love, because you're the ninja in this space, I'd love to hear what you have to say.
So I think this is one of the most interesting, and so the part of me that's a compliance nerd is like, yeah, I get this, and I'll get into that. But the part of me that's a crypto enthusiast is just kind of like, oh, that's silly. And then the part of me that's really a freedom enthusiast doesn't want to see that either. In that, the reason that I really fell in love with Bitcoin was because when I reflected on a lot of my friends and family members that had escaped really crappy situations of persecution with the clothes on their back and money hidden in the diaper of a baby, hoping that was going to be enough to get them across a border to a place of safety where the color of their skin or their sexuality or their religion wasn't a reason that they could be shot on sight. I want there to be something that people can cross borders with. And I want there to be something that is strong and holds value and is censorship resistant. I think that we need that. I think in a big way, we live in an imperfect world, and Bitcoin is an imperfect tool. It carries with it risks. One of those risks is money laundering, but the potential good so far outweighs that my hope is that we don't regulate it. Because yes, there are risks. And part of the reason that the Financial Action Task Force is looking at that is that you can hold other things, right? I can have gold in my house. I can have cash in my house. I can have silver in my house. There's nothing telling me that I can't do that. There's nothing telling me that I can't pay you using gold or cash or silver. And normal tax rules still apply to that. So all of those things exist.
Amber, can we just back a second up? What is the Financial Action Task Force?
And why do they want my Bitcoin?
They don't want your. I mean, they may, but no, it's not their goal.
I know.
So they're an intergovernmental body. Their member countries include any
Canada.
Country that you'd ever want to visit. Yeah, Canada was one of the founding members. Like the U.S. I'm European countries.
G20.
It's a big consortium of all of the countries that gets together to say, here's what we should all do in order to have good, strong systems to prevent and detect and deter money laundering and terrorist financing. Here's the principles that countries must follow, and countries are evaluated against the Financial Action Task Force's recommendations. So these generally aren't, although there's really good information there for companies, but these are really, what does a country have to do to play well within the current global financial system?
So they put out
this is a big part of it.
Recommendations, and then each country puts out their own laws,
legislation.
Around those recommendations. And if you don't put out any rules, what happens to you?
So they have a sort of running bad list. There are countries that are seen as non-cooperative, and right now that's Iran and North Korea. And then there's also a high risk list.
Okay, and they're like cut off from banking, basically?
Not necessarily completely cut
Okay.
off from banking, but it becomes much more difficult for the financial institutions, so for the banks in those countries to do business, to get correspondent accounts. If a country is on a high risk list, people from that country, businesses from that country, banks from that country are going through a lot more scrutiny, and what we would call enhanced due diligence in the AML world.
Okay. So back to peer-to-peer transfers.
Yes. Okay. So we've always been able to transact with other things that are just between us as individuals, right? If I want to trade you
here's some money, Amber.
Yeah, like here's some money, or if I want to trade you 2 chickens for a bicycle, we can do that, right? Like that's a thing that we can do. But if I want to trade you, 2 chickens for a bicycle, and I'm here in Ontario and you're over there in BC, that gets really hard.
Yeah, I want my chickens, yo.
Yeah, so like there's some difficulty in doing these other types of exchanges, whereas with Bitcoin you can do these nearly instantaneous, anywhere in the world. It doesn't matter where I am. Heck, we've seen transfers done that don't even, aren't from a device that's directly connected to the internet, which is really cool.
Yeah.
So
satellites, Bitcoin satellites.
Really cool.
Yes, blockchain
satellites. We have some ham radio enthusiast friends that have done some really interesting things about, like, in terms of radio wave broadcasted transfers. Like,
that's pretty cool.
Yeah, there's a ton of really cool ways that you can do this. And I can't, if I wanted to pay you in chickens or silver or even cash, I can't do it that way.
No, but
right?
you can ham radio me some Bitcoin.
Okay,
ham radio you some Bitcoin.
So
that's risky, right? That's where it's like, oh, there's this risk.
So what you're saying is that, like, if I send you money cash through a bank, it's not an actual transfer of funds, and if so, it's not immediate. It's like, right? It's like my bank is telling your bank that they're good for it, versus, with crypto, it's like me giving you the chicken. Like, I could give my bank the chicken, and then they could tell their bank to give you chickens, but it's going to take a while to drive those chickens across the country. So it is with cash. So I think that's a interesting point, that, like, even with banks and transfers of funds, a lot of it is all based on trust, and the money doesn't.
And being a member of that club and that settlement network.
Yeah. And even in that settlement network, they're trusting each other, and it's not. They might pretend it's instant to us, but they.
I don't even think they bother to pretend it's instant to us.
Okay, so you're right. So maybe, like, let's say it pens and it processes and it pays out in 2 or 3 days. Does the bank actually get the money from the other bank, or can that take longer? Is that them, like, are they just pretending that they got it from each other?
Yeah, there's so much. It depends in the way that those settlement networks work.
Okay.
So let's put the settlement networks aside and let's talk about crypto settlements, right? So if I'm sending you some Bitcoin, Amber, right now, as it stands, I don't have to do any kind of anti-money laundering stuff. But do you think that as the use of crypto grows, people start to get into stable coins, maybe there'll be central bank digital currencies. Do you think that governments will be more and more concerned about these peer-to-peer transactions?
Probably. And I think there's different approaches to things. So one of the things that I think is fascinating in the US is that any business, and I'm not going to talk about crypto, I'm going to talk about fiat again, I'm sorry. But any business that accepts $10,000 or more in cash, right? So you're buying a car, you're doing whatever.
Yeah.
They have to ID someone, and they have to fill out a report, and they submit it to the tax agent. And it's just like a form, but they have this responsibility to do this regardless. So it doesn't matter of what type of transaction that we're doing. I think we may see something like that eventually.
For like peer-to-peer?
At least
I'm
from
moving money
the
between wallets?
U.S. perspective. So
Okay.
so I think what might happen from that perspective is that it would be considered like a cash equivalent.
So Amber, if you were to send me $10,000 worth of Bitcoin, I actually would have to file through MetaMesh. I would have to file with the Department of Treasury already. So,
but that's because you're a business, right? Like you're an MSB.
We're a business.
Right.
Yeah.
Money, service.
Yeah. But what are we afraid of with crypto? Because like as a business that's already there, are you saying that it's possible they might try to regulate it into the protocol so that like as an individual, so what could happen that's negative? I mean,
so the things that I'm worried about, like I'm worried about things like prohibition. So where you wouldn't be able to accept something that came from a wallet that wasn't a hosted wallet.
Okay.
What's a hosted wallet, Amber? For some of the viewers.
So if you don't control your own private keys, someone else controls them for you, which can make, by the way, absolute sense if you're a new user and you don't know how to do the security piece and you're just learning. Hosted wallet, people crap on them all the time. I think they can be a really good choice. At least until you figure out how to do your security and your backups in such a way that's going to make sense. Especially if it's an amount of money that if you were to lose that money would make you cry. If you're thinking about it and you're like, this is so much value that if I lost this value, I would weep. And also I'm not going to learn about private key management or, doing any type of backups today. Finding a trusted partner to host you is probably the right choice right now.
So the concern I'm hearing is that companies that are hosting, that have hosted wallets, so maybe it's an exchange, maybe at some point it's a bank, because banks will soon be able to.
It will be eventually. There's
exactly.
no question.
And so the concern is that if I have my own wallet and I send it to something like an exchange, they won't accept it. Is that what I'm hearing?
So what I'm worried about from that perspective is that you end up with some types of prohibitions, either within regulation or within institutions, where you might have institutions that decide that those transfers are too high risk, that you have some sort of ludicrous amount of enhanced due diligence or hoops that people might need to jump through.
Do you think that these companies like Ledger and Trezor, which make these hardware wallets where I can be my own sovereign bank, right? Or so I hold my own crypto. Do you think that they're going to be potentially shifted towards KYC? So know your customer information, like this person owns this wallet, or no?
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, that's another, Black Mirror version of this whole bit. And the reason that I say that that's a Black Mirror kind of version of this for me is that there are definitely instances where people are fleeing persecution, where people are, are needing to take certain steps to protect themselves, where it just, they're not going to be able to do this, or where people can't meet basic KYC requirements. That one is always really fascinating to me because I grew up in Canada. I grew up in the rich world. I don't get abject poverty. I don't get the idea that you can have a baby and that baby never has a birth certificate attached to it or like any type of like record of personhood, but that exists.
That happens in Canada. It's very frequent in First Nations communities, like proportionally to the population. When I used to work on low-income programs and we talked about sending assistance, low-income assistance to certain individuals, there is a challenge because some of those individuals did not actually have a physical identity document.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
It's very infrequent, but it does happen in Canada too.
Max, that's a good point. It actually happens in other, like in China, for example, you wouldn't expect it because they're so well controlled. They call them Heiheidze. I'm not going to translate it because it sounds racist, but it's not. It means dark child. It means if you have more than one child and you don't want to pay the taxes, there's a whole generation of children, like in Beijing, in Shanghai, not in the countryside, where they don't exist on paper. And their parents could be rich or poor, it doesn't matter, but like they can't go, they're invisible to the system.
So they're like left out of the economy.
And it happens even in like you'd expect it in someone marginalized or not, but this these things happen in places you don't realize because by definition, they're invisible. And so, Amber, what it sounds like you were saying about the regulations is that I think that's right. That if you were to send me $10,000 in Bitcoin, there's no regulations about me, like whether or not I can
just as a person,
as a person, or even as a business. My job is to make sure that I know that it's legitimate money, but I'm not told whether or not it has to be from a specific country. Like for Bitcoin, my job is to make sure you're legitimate, but I'm not like, I could not, let's say you were a refugee and I knew I could, maybe I have to find out that, yeah, you did earn that money legitimately. Right now, the regulations can't prevent me from accepting it because, for example, the wallet was generated in, Zimbabwe. But what you're saying is that there's ways that they could regulate away my right to even do my anti-money laundering and know your customer by targeting types of cryptocurrency like exchanges and wallets and where it comes from that would give power in a way that handing me a bag of cash wouldn't, they couldn't prevent me from you handing me a bag of cash as long as I did the due diligence, but they might be able to in crypto. Is that kind of what you're saying?
And I mean, you could potentially, it's my hope. I mean, I don't think that we'll go that way. I think it's hard to argue that something would happen there that doesn't happen in the cash world. At least from a North American perspective, and from a North American policy perspective, we're not big fans of currency control. So, telling someone how much money they can bring in or take out, our approach has generally been that if you declare it and you provide the right information, carry on. So, when you arrive and you get off an airplane, there's those questions about, do you have $10,000 or more equivalent in whatever the local currency is in cash? And that's there from an anti-money laundering perspective. I know people that have, as part of their business, been challenged by their banking situation, that send a person with a hiking pack full of cash. And that cash goes to the foreign country that it's really hard to get a wire to, and it gets distributed. And they declare it on both ends. They declare it when they leave, they declare it when they arrive, they get to the airport awfully early, because it's they know what they're in for in terms of filling out the paperwork. But there are absolutely legitimate reasons that someone might do something like that.
Do you think the regulations that have been put, because you work in this space in Canada, and particularly service a lot of crypto companies, do you think the regulations have been fair around anti-money laundering? Like, do they make sense?
I don't think that we did. Canada's approach to regulation has really been, here's the existing regulations. Where does this fit into those regulations? I don't think that there's anything that's been imposed from a crypto perspective on crypto companies that hasn't been imposed for other types of businesses. Okay.
So they're generally a fair treatment. That's good to hear. Sometimes I feel like we get a bit of a less fair treatment, especially I think around anti-money laundering concerns. We've seen often people in our industry, whether they were running crypto companies, Bitcoin companies, or BTMs, which are Bitcoin ATMs, and they've had trouble getting bank accounts at banking institutions. They've had trouble even getting COVID relief funding from different kinds of programs, just because when they actually dig in deep down, it's like, oh, well, actually, it's because you're a crypto or a Bitcoin company and we have some concerns. And, it's kind of unsaid and it's in their policies. Maybe you've seen that a little bit more, Amber, just because of the nature of the work that you're in.
So this is true for money service businesses generally. And it was one of the things that when we found out that crypto companies would be regulated as money service businesses, which is like way back in 2014, it went into a federal budget. And there were a lot of people that were like, hooray, this is great. And it's going to make it easier for us to get bank accounts. And I almost wish that there had been a different category or something created, although it's kind of more work for everyone. Because even traditional money service businesses, so businesses that do foreign exchange, businesses that do, remittance, so like your Western Union, where you can send money to another country, they have a really hard time getting bank accounts and maintaining bank accounts, and it's a big challenge in Canada. So for crypto companies, there's a bit of a welcome to the party, I suppose, as far as being an MSB goes. But I think there was a bit of a misconception that having this designation and being regulated was going to immediately mean that everyone would have great access to banking, and that hasn't been the case.
So Amber, do you think they over apply? Like for example, not everybody who touches money or fiat is a money service business, but it almost seems in a lot of jurisdictions that almost anybody who touches crypto except to sell a good, like is it over applied? I mean, is it over applied to our industry, or are we just salty that they've noticed that we
I mean, I think there's a little of column A, a little of column B. I think there are probably calls where I look at something and it maybe doesn't need to be an MSB. You know, it doesn't really present that risk. There are certainly things that happen in other industries, like dealers in precious metals and stones as well, where like if you're buying jewelry at a retail rate in Canada, that's not really great money laundering tactic, but okay, they're regulated. I do think there's a number of things where the regulation that we have isn't necessarily a good fit, because there's a bit of a one size fits all approach that we've taken. Okay. And so when you ask, like, you know, is it fair? Are they imposing something on us that they didn't, apply to other types of companies? No. But also, do those measures make sense for every type of company that's regulated by it? No, that's not really true either. So you're going to have people that complain either way. But I will say that I think we have more just crazy pants things that people do in crypto.
Tell me what.
For lack of a better word.
Let's hear these crazy pants.
Just like, the kind of concepts like, well, if I form and incorporate a company, but I just call it a DEX.
This DEX is
so if I just say it's decentralized, so then it doesn't count, right? And I don't have to follow any rules.
It's decentralized, no central party. Nobody to regulate here.
Say that this thing that's clearly a share, and that clearly I'm marketing as a share and describing as a share and talking about as an ownership stake in my company, but I'm just going to call it like an ICO or an IEO or just something. Pick your acronym of flavor of the week. And say that it's not that, ergo I'm not regulated because blockchain.
Amber, are you saying that I can't sell you a product I never make and then say it's not a share? Well, that doesn't make sense. I want your money, and you gave it to me. You knew I wasn't going to make it.
No. I gave you the disclosures. They were 5 pages long.
They were tweeted out by some dude that we hired. Don't worry about it. It's fine.
So right. Amber and Bite Me is saying there's some crazy talk in the chat. Do you know Bite Me? I
don't. It's I probably met them in VR, virtual reality. Yeah. The fun part about COVID is you find new ways of interacting with people and doing interviews.
Wait, so that's a real person right now. That's a screen name. Bite Me. It's not.
Bite Me is saying.
Like, just yeah. See, this person's very anonymous.
Cool.
And he's trying to preserve privacy. That's what we're trying. That's what we hope regulation continue to do.
So thank you, Bite Me. Bite yourself too. I'd love to.
I think we should round up this conversation, maybe just because you stimulated my thinking towards one thing. You were talking about regs and kind of one size fits all. I just kind of wanted to bring back into the light. So, we've seen changes in anti-money laundering laws in Canada. There were some just recently put out, but
we're coming into force next year.
And there you go, everyone, get ready. Talk to Amber if you're not ready yet. But our securities laws are 15 years out of date. What's interesting is Ontario is doing consultations right now they're modernizing capital markets. That's what their intent, at least that's what they're trying to do, and make them more innovative and attract investment and jobs, et cetera, into Ontario. But what I kind of find interesting about that is that there was a consultation already that happened to build their proposal. But as far as I'm aware, nobody from the crypto industry was asked to kind of provide input yet to put this paper out. And I'm thinking here we are, we're trying to build the most modern financial markets, and some aren't maybe being built the right way because of what you just said, the whole like decentralized, it's okay. But I think, we are trying to build kind of new rules to help people. And I personally, I'm a little bit sad or disappointed that they weren't consulted on that, because, like I said, we're trying to find these new ways of sending value or receiving value, or even disclosures and accounting in this space. So I thought I'd put it out there again for anyone that's in the crypto space to kind of pay attention. I don't know if you want to pull up the consultation document that Ontario is doing.
Is it open for comments right now, the consultation document?
So it's not like too late. You have until September 7th, but I am disappointed because their starting point was to just interview, legacy markets. But the whole point was like, we're trying to be innovative. Like, there's a press release, Dave, that you could pull up for us, where they're talking about like, our financial markets are 15 years out of date and we're trying to bring them more. And I'm like, well, you're kind of starting from an out of date position. If I control F the document and search for words like there's no crypto, no virtual, no digital, no decentralized, like any of the kind of like terms you think about when it comes to crypto, like open banking, open finance, like nothing's in there. So I'm like, man, are you starting from a position that's already out of date? And you're saying we want to attract capital, and they do hit on things actually, that is relevant in this space. Actually, we talked about Quadriga before. They actually are proposing that the Ontario Securities Commission, which is one of the biggest kind of regulators in Canada, because securities are done at the provincial level, so state level, as opposed to federally in the US. And so they're proposing, if there's some sort of shenanigans that happens, if it's not too big, that the securities regulator could be kind of the bankruptcy trustee, as opposed to something like a big EY company coming in, but and going through this big whole court process. So there is some like things that kind of could touch on crypto, or the whole point about like raising money towards startups. There's a whole new proposal around it, but it just kind of talks about angel investors. And I'm like, there's so many alternative ways that we can think about, when it comes to
is that because we already have really bad dysfunctional crowdfunding legislation, or?
Well, I mean, we do. I don't remember seeing any crowdfunding rules discussed in that. But I mean, that's such a good point.
I just wonder if that's outside the purview of this particular.
I think maybe that's why. So crowdfunding rules, I believe they are. Are they provincial or federal, Amber?
They're provincial and not very well aligned.
Okay.
Yeah. So
okay.
It's really hard. It's really hard to do a crowdfunding other than just like, if you want to do it within your province. And like, I'm talking about an equity crowdfunding. I'm not talking about like, I do a Kickstarter for the best skateboard ever and then send it to you.
Send me money. No, but here's my beef, Amber. My beef, and we'll end it. So this is a securities kind of considerations that they're consulting on. But then there's all these other policy areas that fit in, like crowdfunding, because they're getting into sort of, how do we support startups, right? And then there's this whole crypto space that, fits into the crowdfunding rules, into, consumer protection and capital markets, and how can we make them more innovative? It's just like, it seems like it's leaving so much out. So I'd hate, for it to be a missed opportunity in Ontario to kind of be out of date from the get-go. And privacy fits in so well there.
Yeah, we have a consultation happening there right now as well.
On privacy?
And on privacy, and on bringing in new privacy legislation in Ontario with the intent of protecting individuals, concepts like the right to be forgotten, which is pretty central to the UK's privacy law. So
maybe I think that's a chance for us to say, hey, keep those hosted wallets private.
Yes. And I do think when these consultations come up, I mean, and for anyone that has the time and the energy to read them and respond to them and can make the time and the energy to do that, that has something to contribute, please do. Like, don't wait for permission. If you have a bunch, like, don't wait for to be invited for us to have a seat at the table.
Yeah, because we didn't yet, and you might not.
You might die waiting. But
Amber, it seems like it's not too late. You're right.
It's not too late. And even if it's like one tiny thing, like send in a paragraph, better than nothing.
Get in there. You don't have to respond to everything. You can have these consultations that are 50-page consultations. You might care about half a page. Say that you're responding to that half a page and respond to that part of it. If it's something that you can do it under your personal name, you can do it under your company name. If your company's like, no, we're not doing that. See if there's an industry association that represents you that you can talk to, that you can contribute to. We have a few really good ones in the MSB space and in the crypto space that are constantly responding to these consultations.
And in the innovation space,
so there's options.
Yeah,
like there are options.
National Crowdfunding Association.
To
blockchain consortium. There's a few.
Canadian MSB Association. Like there's a bunch of ways that you can respond without necessarily having a company name on it, but that you can contribute ideas. I get that this is exhausting and I do it with some degree of frequency, but if the outcome of it isn't, sometimes the outcome isn't that we're going to have amazing laws. Like it might just be less shitty.
Yeah,
but at least
that's better than just shitty.
Amber, they're asking.
We have to deal with it
for input. That's progress. That is huge progress.
It's like give it, and this is a big part of this is that when you've given that input, you don't have then an agency that can say, well, we didn't know that this was a risk. We didn't know that this was
5 years down the road
a possibility.
Yeah, no, it's such a good point. I think that's a perfect place to end this off. We're hitting the hour mark. Amber, I love having you on. You're amazing.
Love being here. Thank you.
You're energetic. Thank you for, dropping some truths.
You just how to launder money on fiat and
I know, right? Yeah. I'll talk to you after the session because I got to fill in my notes, right?
Yeah.
All right.
So on you, right?
So what?
Oh no! There we go.
Oh
yes.
So that was funny. So, like as if you got caught.
Just like, whoosh.
You're down.
One of the worst things that happens to me is that like every now and again somebody will be like, "Oh, teach me how to launder money," and my comeback to that has become to look them from head to toe and say, "Sweetie, step one is you'd have to have money, and then walk away." 100% effective.
Amazing. So if you guys
when bars are open again, don't try that.
Where can they find you, Amber? Where can they get some sass?
sass and Sage AML advice at outliercanada.com.
Excellent.
We'll drop that in the description as well. And
and Amber has some really great takes always on Twitter too. We can drop that in as well. So excellent. Thank you everyone who showed up live. And thanks everyone who's watching the replay. We'll drop the info in, and I hope everyone has a great day. Thanks, Amber.
For fighting us.
Thanks, all.